they'd have supper together. Since their marriage 8 months ago, she'd gotten used to eating later. But the more advanced her pregnancy, the harder it was to delay a meal. And now she was ravenous. Wally had called around 4 to say he would be late because the officer scheduled for the afternoon shift had, at the last minute, called in sick. As the chief of police, Wally needed to find a replacement for the guy before he could leave the station. The town's population might be only a little over 3,000, but someone still had to be on duty at all times. What time was it? Skye glanced at her wrist, frowning when she discovered her trusty Timex was missing. Shoot. After her first day back at work after summer vacation, she'd been so warm and sticky that she'd stripped and showered as soon as she got home. The high school's AC had been on the fritz, and Skye's office had felt like a sauna. Because her job included working with students at all 3 schools in the district, she could have moved over to one of the other buildings, but it was highly unlikely any of them would have been much better. Before she'd claimed the space, her offices at the elementary and junior high had both been storage closets. Even in the best of circumstances, those rooms were usually hot as heck or colder than Antarctica. Instead of seeking a cooler place to work, Skye had ignored her discomfort and spent the majority of her time getting her calendar set up for the rest of the year. She'd had her testing and counseling schedule mostly in place before she'd left for summer break, but there were always transfer students to accommodate. She had wasted a good half hour trying to figure out how to pronounce the name of one of the new girls. It was listed as L-E-A, and initially, Skye had assumed it was pronounced Leah, but she hated to call the teen by the wrong name. It could be Leah, or Leia, or even Lay. Finally, Skye had just telephoned the student's mom to ask, and she was really glad she'd made the call. The girl's mother had explained that her daughter's name was Lee Dasha. Evidently, the dash in L-E-A wasn't silent. Paying attention to details such as correctly pronouncing names was one of many tidbits Skye intended to pass on to her new intern, Piper Townsend. In fact, she'd hoped to use today, before the students started school, to familiarize the woman with her duties. But Piper had had car trouble and wouldn't arrive until tomorrow. The woman really should have been better prepared and moved to town over the weekend. Her lack of planning made Skye wonder if she'd hired the right applicant. Of course, there hadn't been that many candidates to choose from. A ridiculously low stipend and the promise of a heavy caseload hadn't exactly been enticing to the new grads. Plus, there was the fact that Skye would have 6 weeks at the most to help Piper get settled before going out on maternity leave. In theory, during Skye's absence, a school psychologist from the Stanley County Special Education Cooperative would supervise the woman. In practice, Skye feared that even if it meant she had to guide the intern via telephone while cradling her newborn, she would end up with the brunt of the responsibility. At that disquieting thought, Skye bit her lip. She really hoped there wouldn't be any crises until after she got used to being a mother, coping with oomph. Everything below Skye's waist tightened as if a giant fist had closed around her uterus. She dug her nails into the smooth leather armrest while she tried to breathe through the pain. The first time she'd felt the squeezing sensation, she'd panicked and called her OBGYN, convinced she was going into labor. Dr. Johnson had reassured Skye that the baby wasn't about to make an early appearance. Instead, she was experiencing Braxton Hicks contractions, and although uncomfortable, unless the contractions grew consistently longer, stronger, and closer together, everything was fine. Now, as she panted through the contraction, Skye gripped the wooden lever on the side of the recliner and pushed until the footrest lowered. Then, risking the wrath of Bingo, she picked up the cat, put him on the floor, and struggled out of the chair. She shoved her swollen feet into a pair of flip-flops and began to pace. Walking usually provided some relief from the Braxton Hicks throbbing, but as Skye marched the length of the sunroom, the pain continued. Her doctor had warned her that dehydration could worsen the discomfort, and she'd been sweating all day. Maybe water would help. Heading into the kitchen, Skye snagged a bottle of Dasani from the refrigerator and chugged it. As she drank, she checked the microwave clock. It was 5:30. She'd been asleep for more than an hour. Where was Wally? When the contractions eased, Skye glanced at the telephone hanging on the wall near the stove. The tiny light on the base